The galaxy was dying. For 300 years, two massive alien empires had been fighting each other across the stars. The Hegemony Coalition controlled half the known worlds, while the Void Syndicate ruled the other half. What started as a border dispute had grown into something much worse. Now entire star systems lay empty, their planets burned to ash. Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display. Another red dot had appeared on the map. Another system had fallen to the enemy. He rubbed his 4 eyes with his clawed hands, feeling older than his 200 years. The Coalition had been his life, but now he wondered if there would be anything left to save. The war had changed everything. Species that once built wonders among the stars now lived in underground bunkers. The proud Nexari, who had created floating cities that danced between planets, now survived in metal boxes buried deep in asteroids. The crystal beings of Andromache, whose songs could make stars shine brighter, had gone silent forever after their homeworld was cracked in half by a syndicate planet killer. Both sides had run out of heroes long ago. Now they used machines that could think, weapons that ate whole worlds, and viruses that turned friendly computers into killers. The Coalition's latest weapon was a gas that made enemy soldiers forget how to breathe. The Syndicate had created metal bugs that could eat through any armor and then build more of themselves from the pieces. Veltar had seen it all. He had watched brave pilots fly into black holes just to take out one enemy ship. He had ordered the evacuation of 3 billion civilians, knowing that half would die before the rescue ships arrived. He had signed papers that turned beautiful garden worlds into poisoned wastelands that would stay dead for 1,000 years. The worst part was that nobody remembered why they were fighting anymore. The original documents had been lost when the central archives were destroyed 50 years ago. Some said it started over mining rights. Others claimed it was about a trade agreement gone wrong. A few whispered that it began when a Coalition diplomat insulted a Syndicate princess at a peace dinner. None of that mattered now. The war had become its own living thing, feeding on hatred and fear. Young soldiers were born, trained, and died without ever seeing a peaceful world. Generals made plans not for victory, but for making sure the enemy suffered more than they did. Then something impossible happened. It started with reports from scout ships at the edge of Coalition space. Strange vessels had been spotted near the outer rim, ships that didn't match any known design. They were small, barely the size of a transport, and they moved in ways that made no sense. Instead of the smooth curves of Coalition ships or the sharp angles of Syndicate craft, these newcomers looked rough and practical, like tools made by someone who cared more about getting work done than looking impressive. The first contact came during a routine patrol. Captain Lee Minho was leading a small squadron near the ruins of the Kepler system when the unknown ships appeared. There were only 3 of them, tiny compared to his heavy cruiser, but they moved with confidence that suggested they weren't afraid. Minho had been fighting for 15 years. He had seen every trick the Syndicate could throw at him. But these ships were different. They didn't charge in with weapons blazing, and they didn't try to run away. Instead, they just sat there in space, broadcasting the same message over and over again. The language was completely unknown. The Coalition's computers, which could translate over 10,000 different alien tongues, had never heard anything like it. The sounds were harsh and choppy, full of sharp consonants and quick rhythms. It took 3 days for the translation, programs to make sense of it. When the message finally came through clearly, every officer on the bridge stopped what they were doing to stare at the speakers. The voice was calm and steady, with a strange accent that somehow made even simple words sound determined. "This is the Terran Expeditionary Force. We represent the planet Earth and the human species. We have been watching your conflict and believe we can help. We request permission to approach and discuss terms for ending this war. We come in peace, but we are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. Please respond." Minho looked around, his bridge at faces that showed the same confusion he felt. Humans? Earth? Nobody had ever heard of either one. The Galactic database had no record of any species calling themselves human, and no star charts showed a world called Earth. But there, they were 3 small ships sitting calmly in the middle of a war zone, asking if they could help end a 300-year conflict. It would have been funny if it wasn't so strange. The first real test came 3 weeks after the humans announced their presence. A coalition refugee convoy was limping through the broken sector, carrying survivors from a recently destroyed mining colony. The ships were old and slow, packed with families who had lost everything, when the Syndicate decided their world had too many valuable minerals to leave in enemy hands. Captain Park Ji-woo was patrolling nearby in his ship, the UES Busan, when the distress call came through. Syndicate raiders had found the convoy and were moving in for the kill. This was standard practice in the war. Refugees were just future soldiers, so both sides had stopped pretending to care about protecting them. But the humans were different. Park's ship rushed toward the battle, even though it was smaller than any of the Syndicate raiders. The aliens expected him to use energy weapons like everyone else in the galaxy had for the past 1,000 years. Instead, the Busan opened fire with something they had never seen before. Metal projectiles, fired at incredible speed, smashed into the raider ships. The Syndicate captain couldn't understand how such primitive weapons could punch through his advanced shields. The answer was simple but shocking. The humans had studied the war for decades and noticed something everyone else had missed. All modern shields were designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts. Nobody had bothered to protect against old-fashioned bullets, even really big, really fast ones. The first raider ship lost its main gun when a tungsten rod traveling at 10% of light speed tore through its hull. The second ship tried to retreat, but found its engines disabled by what the humans called a kinetic penetrator. The third ship's captain decided to fight, and learned why that was a mistake when explosive shells started detonating inside his bridge. But the strangest part wasn't how the humans fought. It was what they did after winning. Instead of finishing off the damaged Syndicate ships, Park ordered his crew to prepare boarding parties. The aliens on both sides watched in confusion as human soldiers in simple metal armor jumped from ship to ship, carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum. These weren't energy rifles or plasma cannons. They were projectile weapons that fired metal bullets and explosive rounds. The Syndicate warriors were bigger and stronger than humans, with natural armor and claws that could cut through steel. But the humans fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They worked together perfectly, covering each other and moving like they shared one mind. When a Syndicate soldier tried to use his superior strength, the humans simply shot him from a distance. When the enemy tried to use their natural armor, the humans used armor-piercing rounds that went right through. More importantly, the humans did something that amazed everyone watching. They actually tried to capture enemies alive. Lieutenant Kim Han-wol led the boarding party onto the raider flagship. Instead of killing everyone they found, the humans used non-lethal weapons to knock out the crew. They provided medical aid to wounded Syndicate soldiers. They even made sure the ship's life support systems stayed working so nobody would suffocate. The Syndicate captain, a reptilian creature named Sis-Katar, couldn't believe what was happening. "Why don't you just kill us?" he asked through the translator. As human medics bandaged his wounds, Kim looked at him with genuine confusion. "Why would we want to kill you? The war's the problem, not the people fighting it." This attitude spread to everything the humans did. Dr. Kim So-young arrived with the medical ships and immediately started treating wounded from both sides. Coalition soldiers lay next to Syndicate warriors in the same hospital beds, receiving the same care from the same doctors. The human medical staff didn't ask which side anyone was on. They just saw people who needed help. The aliens couldn't understand this at all. Dr. Vexani, the Coalition's chief medical officer, watched in amazement as Dr. Kim performed surgery on a Syndicate commando who had been trying to kill Coalition civilians just hours before. "How can you help our enemies?" Vexani asked. Dr. Kim didn't even look up from her work. "I don't see enemies, I see patients. This soldier has 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding. Those are medical problems, not political ones." The word spread quickly through both fleets. The humans had medical ships that would treat anyone who needed help. They didn't care about military ranks or political allegiances. If you were hurt, they would try to fix you. Commander Choi Woo-jin took this idea even further. He established neutral medical stations throughout the sector, clearly marked with red crosses that both sides learned to respect. Syndicate and Coalition ships would approach these stations flying white flags, dropping off their wounded and picking up their healed. The stations became something neither side had seen in centuries, places where the war stopped. Syndicate engineers would work alongside coalition technicians to keep the medical equipment running. Enemy soldiers would sit in the same waiting rooms, sharing stories about home instead of trying to kill each other. Both military commands tried to forbid their people from using human medical services, but the orders were quietly ignored. Word got out that the humans could fix injuries that coalition and syndicate doctors had given up on. They had medicines that could regrow lost limbs and technologies that could repair brain damage. Most importantly, they treated everyone the same way. Rich or poor, officer or enlisted, coalition or syndicate. Everyone got the same chance to live. The galaxy's military leaders thought they had figured out the humans after the first few battles. Simple weapons, basic tactics, nothing to worry about. They were wrong. Colonel Kang Tai-min proved this when the Syndicate launched a major offensive through the asteroid belt of Kronos. The alien commanders expected an easy victory. The belt was just empty space filled with floating rocks, perfect for their fast attack ships to sweep through and hit coalition supply lines. Instead, they flew into a nightmare. Kang had spent 2 months in the asteroid field with a small team of engineers. To outside observers, it looked like the humans were just mining rocks and setting up communication relays. But when the Syndicate fleet arrived, they discovered the terrible truth. Every major asteroid had been turned into a weapon. The first Syndicate ship to enter the belt triggered a chain reaction that lit up half the sector. Hidden charges detonated inside asteroids, turning them into massive shotgun blasts of high-speed rock fragments. Ships that survived the initial explosions found themselves flying through clouds of metal debris moving at incredible speeds. But Kang wasn't finished. The asteroids themselves had been connected by nearly invisible cables, creating a web that caught ships like insects. When Syndicate vessels tried to change course, they discovered that the humans had predicted their movements. Every escape route led to another trap. The most shocking part came when the surviving Syndicate ships tried to use their advanced sensors to map the minefield. Major Shin Hye-jin activated electronic warfare systems that the aliens didn't even know existed. Instead of using energy to jam enemy communications, the humans used something much simpler and more effective. Every piece of metal in the asteroid field had been turned into a radio antenna. When Shin activated the system, it created electronic noise so loud that it overloaded every sensor, computer, and communication device within 50 light-years. Syndicate ships found themselves flying blind. Their advanced technology turned into expensive junk by what amounted to a really big radio transmitter. The Syndicate Admiral, Corveth the Destroyer, managed to escape with only 30% of his fleet intact. He immediately demanded answers from his intelligence officers. How had such primitive creatures defeated his advanced warships? The answer came from an unexpected source. General Yoon Jae-sung, the overall commander of human forces, requested a meeting with both Syndicate and Coalition leadership. The location he chose surprised everyone. Instead of a neutral space station or diplomatic vessel, he wanted to meet on the surface of Kepler Prime, a world that had been bombed into ruins 50 years ago. Representatives from both sides arrived to find Yoon, waiting in what had once been the planet's capital city. The buildings were destroyed. The atmosphere was poisoned and radiation made the surface barely habitable. It was the perfect symbol of what the war had accomplished. Yoon was not what the alien leaders expected. He was an older man with grey hair and tired eyes, wearing a simple uniform without the medals and decorations that usually marked high-ranking officers. He looked more like a teacher than a general. "We've been watching your war for 87 years, he said without ceremony. "We've recorded every battle, analyzed every tactic, studied every weapon you've used against each other. We know how you fight because we've seen you do it thousands of times." The coalition representative, Admiral Thekvar, bristled at this admission. "You've been spying on us for nearly a century." Yoon nodded calmly. "Yes, and what we learned horrified us. You're not fighting a war anymore. You're committing slow-motion suicide on a galactic scale." He activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as it had been 300 years ago. Thousands of thriving worlds, trade routes connecting dozens of species, scientific research, her stations pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Then the display shifted to show the present day. Dead worlds, empty space, and two exhausted empires slowly bleeding to death. "You want to know our strategy?" Yoon continued. "It's simple. We're not here to help either of you win. We're here to make sure you both stop losing." The Syndicate commander, General Vextor, laughed harshly. "Impossible. We've tried peace negotiations dozens of times. They always fail." "Because you're trying to negotiate victory," Yoon replied. "We're not interested in who wins or loses. We're interested in ending the war itself." To prove his point, Yoon revealed what human forces had been doing while everyone focused on the dramatic space battles. Small teams of human engineers had been secretly repairing damaged civilian infrastructure throughout the galaxy. They fixed water treatment plants on Coalition worlds and restored power grids on Syndicate planets. They did this without asking permission and without taking sides. More shocking still, humans had been targeting both sides' military infrastructure equally. The asteroid field trap wasn't just used against the Syndicate. A similar system had been used to destroy a Coalition weapons factory the week before. Human cyber warfare specialists had shut down Syndicate command centers and Coalition missile silos with the same electronic attacks. "Every weapon you build extends the war," Yoon explained. "Every military base you construct makes peace harder for to achieve, so we destroy them, all of them, equally." This revelation sent shockwaves through both military commands. The humans weren't primitive newcomers stumbling around a conflict they didn't understand. They were sophisticated strategists who had spent decades preparing for this moment. Lieutenant Colonel Park Dong-soo had infiltrated a Coalition shipyard and discovered plans for a new type of planet-killer weapon. Instead of stealing the plans or destroying the facility, he had done something much more clever. He had introduced tiny flaws into the manufacturing process that would make the weapons unreliable and dangerous to their users. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Soo-jin had been working inside Syndicate research facilities, sabotaging bioweapon development by introducing genetic modifications that made the weapons harmless to their intended targets. The aliens realized they were facing something completely new in galactic warfare, an enemy that fought not to conquer territory or destroy opponents, but to eliminate war itself. The war almost ended the galaxy forever on a Tuesday. Both the Coalition and Syndicate had been secretly building the same type of weapon. They called them different names, but the result would be identical. Planet killers that could crack worlds in half and turn entire star systems into dead zones. The Coalition's version was called the Final Solution device. The Syndicate preferred World Breaker. Neither side knew the other was so close to completion. Intelligence reports reached both military commands on the same day. The Coalition learned that the Syndicate was preparing to test their weapon on a captured Coalition world, with 2 billion civilians. The Syndicate discovered that the Coalition planned to use their device on the Syndicate's most important industrial planet, home to 5 billion people. Both sides made the same decision. Strike first. Lieutenant Commander Oh Da-som was monitoring Syndicate communications from her stealth ship when she intercepted the launch orders. The World Breaker was already moving toward its target, escorted by the largest fleet the Syndicate had assembled in 50 years. At the same time, long-range sensors detected the Coalition's Final Solution device heading in the opposite direction, protected by their own massive armada. If both weapons reached their targets, 14 star systems would become uninhabitable. Graveyards? The survivors would be so few and so scattered that galactic civilization would collapse within a generation. Oh Da-som faced an impossible choice. Her ship was fast and well-equipped, but it was just one vessel against 2 entire fleets. She couldn't stop both weapons, and she couldn't choose which billions of people deserved to live or die. So she did something that made perfect sense to a human, but seemed insane to everyone else. She called for help from both sides at once. Using captured Coalition and Syndicate communication codes, she sent identical messages to both fleets. The message was simple, but carefully crafted to sound like it came from each faction's own intelligence services. It warned that the enemy had developed a new type of weapon that could destroy planet killers before they reached their targets, and that immediate action was needed to protect their own super weapons. The result was exactly what Odarsom had hoped for. Both fleets began taking defensive positions, moving their escort ships into protective formations around their planet killers. This gave her the opening she needed. The Syndicate World Breaker was a massive cylinder covered in weapons and armor, designed to punch through any defense and deliver its deadly payload. But Odarsom had studied the design files that human agents had stolen months earlier. She knew the weapon had one critical weakness. Like all Syndicate technology, the World Breaker was powered by a fusion reactor that could be overloaded if the right systems were damaged. The trick was getting close enough to target those systems, without being destroyed by the escort fleet. Odarsom used a tactic that had become standard for human operations. Instead of trying to fight through the Syndicate defenders, she made them fight each other. Her ship's electronic warfare systems sent false sensor readings to different parts of the escort fleet, making some ships think they were under attack by their own allies. The confusion lasted only minutes, but that was enough. While Syndicate ships were trying to figure out why their sensors showed friendly vessels as hostile targets, Odarsom slipped through their formation and attached a small device to the World Breaker's hull. The device was simple but effective. It was basically a computer virus in physical form, designed to spread through the weapon's control systems and turn its own power source against it. When Odarsom triggered the virus remotely, the World Breaker's fusion reactor began overloading, exactly as planned. But here's where the story gets interesting. The Coalition fleet, following their own defensive protocols, detected the energy buildup in the Syndicate weapon and assumed it was preparing to fire. Their response was immediate and overwhelming. Every Coalition ship in the area opened fire on the World Breaker, trying to destroy it before it could launch. Odarsom found herself in the middle of the largest space battle in decades, with Coalition forces unknowingly providing cover for her escape, while simultaneously helping to destroy the very weapon she had just sabotaged. The irony was perfect and completely unplanned. The World Breaker exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from 12 star systems away. The explosion was so massive that it disabled half of both fleets and created a new nebula that would be visible for thousands of years. While Odarsom was dealing with the Syndicate weapon, Captain Nam Kitai was handling the Coalition's final solution device. His approach was completely different, but equally effective. Instead of sabotage or battle, he used something much more powerful: the truth. Nam had been collecting evidence for months: video recordings of war crimes, documents describing illegal experiments on prisoners, communications between military leaders discussing the deliberate targeting of civilian populations. Both sides had committed terrible acts during the 3-century war, but they had been careful to keep the worst atrocities secret from their own people. Nam changed that with a single broadcast, using communication systems that human engineers had secretly installed throughout the galaxy. He transmitted everything at once. Every war crime, every cover-up, every order to massacre civilians or poison entire worlds. The broadcast reached every inhabited planet, every military base, every refugee camp. The reaction was immediate and devastating. On Coalition worlds, citizens discovered that their government had been using bioweapons on Syndicate children. On Syndicate planets, people learned that their leaders had been conducting medical experiments on Coalition prisoners. Military personnel on both sides realized that the heroic war they thought they were fighting was actually a series of atrocities committed in their names. But Nam's masterstroke wasn't exposing the crimes. It was revealing what humans had been doing while both sides were busy committing them. For the past 5 years, human ships had been secretly evacuating civilian populations from both Coalition and Syndicate worlds that were marked for destruction. They had established hidden colonies in uncharted systems, places where families could live without fear of raids or bombardments. These colonies were the proof that peace was possible. Former Coalition and Syndicate citizens were living together, sharing resources, building new communities. Children who had been taught to hate each other were playing together and becoming friends. The broadcast showed footage from these colonies, Syndicate engineers working alongside coalition farmers, mixed families where parents from different species were raising children together, schools where young people learned history without the propaganda that had poisoned previous generations. How evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. While their governments had been perfecting new ways to kill each other, humans had been proving that cooperation was not only possible, but natural. The response was swift and dramatic. Entire star systems declared neutrality and requested human protection. Military units on both sides began refusing orders to attack civilian targets. Moderate politicians who had been silenced for decades suddenly found themselves with massive popular support. The war machine that had consumed the galaxy for 3 centuries began breaking down not from military defeat, but from moral exhaustion. The war didn't end with a surrender ceremony or peace treaty. It simply stopped, like a machine that had finally run out of fuel. Within 6 months of Captain Namki-Tay's galaxy-wide broadcast, both the coalition and syndicate governments were facing massive internal rebellions. Soldiers were deserting by the millions. Entire planets were declaring independence. The civilian populations that had supported the war for 3 centuries suddenly wanted nothing to do with it. Admiral Bae Seung-ho watched this collapse from the bridge of the UES Incheon, humanity's largest vessel. As the most senior human officer in the galaxy, he found himself in an impossible position. Both sides were begging for human intervention, but not in the way anyone expected. The coalition's remaining leadership wanted humans to help them maintain control over their crumbling empire. The syndicate's military commanders offered to make humans their allies in exchange for support against their own rebellious populations. Everyone assumed that humanity would choose a side and claim their reward for ending the war. Instead, Admiral Bae called a meeting on the neutral space station that humans had built in the ruins of the old Nexus system. Representatives from both factions arrived expecting to negotiate new alliances. What they got was something completely different. "We're not here to replace your governments," Bae announced to the assembled delegates. "We're not here to rule the galaxy or divide up territory between us. We're here to help clean up the mess and then go home." The alien representatives couldn't believe what they were hearing. Humans had the strongest military in the galaxy, the loyalty of dozens of star systems, and evidence of war crimes that could destroy any political career. They could have demanded anything and gotten it. Colonel Hwang Min-jun, Bai's chief of staff, explained the human position more clearly. "Look, around you. Half the galaxy is in ruins. Billions of people are homeless. Entire species are on the edge of extinction. You want to know what we want? We want to fix this." The solution they proposed was radical but simple. Instead of victory for either side, they suggested something that had never been tried before: complete reconstruction from the ground up. The Galactic Reconstruction Council was established 3 months later. Unlike the old imperial governments, it wasn't based on military conquest or political dominance. Instead, it was built around the practical work of rebuilding civilization. Commander Lim Yu-jin became the first director of reconstruction operations, a job that required skills no military academy had ever taught. Her first task was to coordinate relief efforts for over 200 billion refugees scattered across the galaxy. These weren't just coalition or syndicate citizens. They were families that had been running from the war for so long that many children had never seen their ancestral homeworlds. The work was enormous and complicated. Destroyed worlds needed new atmospheres. Poisoned planets required decades of environmental cleanup. Species that had been driven to the edge of extinction needed genetic diversity programs to survive. Trade routes that had been cut by 3 centuries of war needed to be re-established. But the biggest challenge wasn't technical. It was convincing former enemies to work together. Lieutenant Colonel Park Hyun-woo discovered this when he was assigned to oversee the reconstruction of the Altair shipyards. The facility had been captured and recaptured 17 times during the war. Coalition and syndicate engineers had sabotaged each other's work so many times that nobody remembered how the original systems were supposed to function. Park's solution was typically human. Instead of choosing one side's approach over the other, he made both groups work together to create something entirely new. Coalition gravity control systems were combined with syndicate power generation technology. The result was a shipyard that was more efficient than anything either side had built alone. More importantly, the engineers who had been trying to kill each other just months before discovered that they actually enjoyed working together. Coalition scientists were amazed by syndicate biotechnology. Syndicate researchers were fascinated by coalition quantum mechanics. When people focused on solving problems instead of winning wars, old hatreds began to fade. Major Kim Jae-won experienced this firsthand while coordinating agricultural restoration on dozens of worlds. Many planets had been deliberately poisoned during the war, their soil contaminated with chemicals that would prevent food production for centuries. Both sides had developed countermeasures for these weapons, but they had kept the technology secret to maintain military advantages. Kim convinced both factions to share their knowledge openly. The result was remarkable. Coalition soil treatment techniques, combined with syndicate biological remediation, could restore dead worlds in just a few years instead of centuries. But the real breakthrough came when refugee populations from both sides started working together on the actual restoration projects. Former coalition soldiers found themselves working alongside ex-syndicate Marines, using tools to grow food instead of weapons to destroy it. Children who had grown up in refugee camps were finally able to see green plants and blue skies. Families that had been separated by the war for decades were reunited on worlds that were literally rising from the dead. The changes went deeper than anyone expected. Captain Song Da-bin was managing refugee resettlement when she noticed something interesting in the reports. Children from mixed camps, where coalition and syndicate families lived together, were performing better in school than kids from single-faction communities. They were more creative, better at solving problems, and more cooperative with others. The reason was simple but profound. When you grow up around people who are different from you, you learn that difference isn't dangerous. You discover that other perspectives make you smarter, not weaker. You realize that cooperation produces better results than competition. This lesson spread throughout the galaxy as reconstruction efforts continued. Mixed communities became the norm rather than the exception. Scientific research projects that combined knowledge from multiple species made breakthroughs that no single faction could have achieved alone. Art and culture flourished as different traditions mixed and evolved. The old empires had been built on the idea that strength came from conquest and unity meant conformity. The new civilization that grew from their ruins was based on something completely different. Strength came from cooperation, and unity was built from diversity. Commander Yu Seo-jin summed it up perfectly during the 5th anniversary celebration of the Reconstruction Council. Standing before representatives from over 100 worlds, she said something that would have been impossible to imagine during the war years. We learned that victory doesn't mean defeating your enemies. It means refusing to accept that they have to stay enemies forever.